And back with us now is Greg Swenson, the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, currently joining us. I saw there from Chicago. So you're in the States at the moment. Major trade shocks on the way. Do you see any sign of those yet, Greg?
No, I have not, Mark. I haven't seen anything dramatic. I'm not suggesting there won't be some price adjustments or some disruption to supply chains. I think that's natural with, a sort of a disruptive change in trade policy, and that's what we're seeing. So I think a lot of the outcomes are greatly exaggerated. I think inflation is potentially there'll be one-time price adjustments. But most of those adjustments are covered by either the supplier, the company that's exporting to the U.S. in the American example, or it's accounted for by the currency adjustment. Well, MIT is saying only 20% of the tariff is actually paid by the consumer, and we saw this in the first term where there was no meaningful inflation after the tariffs were put on certain Chinese products. I think it's much more important to look at fiscal policy, like spending, for example, tax reform, deregulation. Those are the things that are really important in terms of inflation. And we learned that the hard way during the Biden years. And I think that if you look at trade policy, yes, again, there could be some one-time price adjustments, but if you combine that with reform and deregulation, and I mean massive deregulation is what we're seeing now from the Trump administration, that's going to have the effects both on economic growth, inflation, and especially and most importantly, real wage growth.
And how soon do you think consumers are going to start to feel the pinch of prices going up, or perhaps even job losses?
I'm not worried about that. I think the job losses that we're seeing so far are in Washington in government. 63% of job growth during the Biden years was in government and healthcare is basically government. So it's not something that we're worried about. If there's some reallocation from the public sector to the private sector, that's great for the real economy. So I'm not too worried about the short-term and near-term impact of tariffs. Again, will the price of imports from China go up? Yeah, they will. But we buy we buy 5 times as much from China as they buy from us. So my guess is the outcome of this little trade battle that we're experiencing is that the Chinese will come to the table. There'll be a trade deal. It will be productive. It will be fair. And we'll see free and fair trade for the first time, perhaps in 30 years.
So we're playing chicken at the moment with China, aren't we? And China is not a democracy like the United States and can take a lot of pain. They're not going to back down, are they?
Well, I think that they would. I can't promise that. Right now, I think it's just a lot of bluster. You're right. They don't have elections, so Xi does not have to answer to the voters, to the people. And so he doesn't mind if his, 300 million of his people are living on a bowl of rice a day. That's what is the case now. It could get worse as manufacturing declines, which I think we've already seen the beginning of that in China. 33%, 1/3 of their exports go to the United States. The United States is still the biggest consumer in the world, somewhere between 35 and 40%. That is something that, in a trade war, China will lose. I hope there isn't a trade war, but if there is, the United States can handle it. It's really no big deal. It's 2% of US GDP. Whereas with China, it's a significant part of their GDP. They can't replace the consumer from the United States with the consumption from Europe because Europeans don't have the spending power, the buying power. So right now, even the EU has a major trade deficit with China, but they offset that with a trade surplus with the United States. So yeah, we're going to see some real disruption in the global trade order. I don't think that's any mystery. I think that's quite deliberate. But I do think ultimately it works out. And we're seeing that already with the 100 countries that have come to Washington to negotiate free and fair trade. And you'll see, 17 of the 18 major trading partners with the United States are at the table right now, with the exception of China. But I do think that will change. And especially as we start seeing trade deals with India, with the United Kingdom, hopefully with the EU in the near term. So this is a bump in the road right now, and I know the markets don't like uncertainty. That's for sure. It has not flowed to the real economy yet. Although you're seeing a lot of reports come out that are downgrading next quarter GDP, for example. I think that's a lot of alarmism baked in there. But on the other hand, maybe I'm an economic optimist by nature, but I'm looking at President Trump's track record from the first term, where he really crushed it on the economy. People might not, many voters who voted for him this time, maybe did not miss President Trump, but they missed the peace and prosperity of 2019 and 20. So I'm optimistic that this time around, it's maybe a little bolder and a little bit more aggressive and, unorthodox, but he's fixing things that are broken in terms of trade. He's
Well,
liberating.
that's kind of not what the people are saying, though, is it? I mean, if you've seen the polls, he has the lowest poll ratings. They don't approve of his handling of the economy. They don't approve of the trade tariffs. And he has the lowest rating. The only lower rating was himself in his first term.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the polls, because right now there's an interesting poll called the regret poll. That do you regret voting for a certain candidate? 2% of Trump voters are expressing regret right now. That's versus 14% for Biden. You've got 69% saying that Democrats are out of touch with average Americans. This is he's at 45% right now in the real clear politics average.
I think it was 36 last time I checked, but we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid, Greg. But thank you so much for being on the program, as always. It's great to have you on the show.